hope this is recording. This is my first time ever recording on this camera. I've only used it before to take pictures on it, never to take a video. And also, I'm pretty sure the sound quality on this camera is horrible and I don't have a microphone. So I'm going to try to make the sound be as clear as possible when I'm editing it. But yeah. So my name is Milena and today I'm going to be convincing you. The pile was organized before this video, now it's not. Today I'm going to be convincing you to read some of my all-time favorite books so far. And this is my first YouTube video ever, so enjoy! So I've compiled a list of both fiction and non-fiction books that I read over the past year, as that is when I got back into reading. As a child, I read hundreds of books, and about 2 or 3 years ago, for some reason, I just completely stopped reading. And as I was getting back into reading recently, I refused to read fiction for some reason. I had this weird belief instilled in me that fiction won't benefit me as opposed to non-fiction. But luckily I forced myself to read fiction anyway, and I'm so glad I did because honestly it's the best thing ever and I did discover some gems. So yeah, so this list may change in the future, but for now here are some of my favorites and let's start with the non-fictions. First non-fiction book that I will never stop recommending to everyone, especially women, is Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. So Clarissa Pinkola Estes is a poet, a psychoanalyst, and a post-trauma specialist. She has a doctorate in Jungian psychology and is a cantadora, which I believe is a keeper of the old stories in a Latin tradition. In this book, she beautifully uses Jungian psychology, which she applies onto ancient family tales from different cultures, some which are even familiar to me, to create a seminal work on the inner life of women. She uses wolves as a personification of women's psyche. She explains how there's a, quote, wild woman, which lives in every single woman, which is filled with passion, creativity, endless knowledge, and strong intuition, as well as independence. But it has sadly been repressed and oppressed for centuries by a value system that underplays women's emotions and intuitive wisdom. She offers examples and psychology to back that up. As a woman myself, reading her book, I just intuitively understand everything she was talking about in this book, and it's honestly a brilliant guide for directing your life as a woman without having to emotionally depend on anyone. The second book I recommend is a little bit more out there, but if you're an astrology and/or philosophy lover, or even if you're an astrology skeptic and believe that astrology lacks a logical explanation, I recommend Cosmos and Psyches by Richard Tarnas. So Richard Tarnas is a historian and astrologer, and some of you guys might recognize his book, The Passion of the Western Mind more, which I haven't actually read yet. But in all of his teachings, he focuses on archetypal astrology, cosmology, and many other interesting things. But to put it simply, Cosmos and Psyches is about how the major events of Western culture history correlate consistently and accurately with the cyclical movements of the planets, so basically astrology. Therefore, it's a groundbreaking book that challenges the, quote, modern worldview, and it's very philosophical if you're into that kind of stuff. The reason why this book will always be one of my favorite pieces of nonfiction work is because it's the only book that I've ever came across that challenges our worldview in such a provocative but profound way. And honestly, it's a one-of-a-kind, mind-blowing book that presents so much immense detail and research. These were the only two nonfiction books that I recommend. I've read way more nonfiction books that are interesting and that definitely would be worth like a whole separate video on. But these are just like my all-time favorites that I probably would recommend to anyone if they asked me like, what book do you recommend? That is what I'd say straight off the bat, just because they're probably the most influential nonfiction books I've ever read. There's many other ones, but these are like the top two. So now moving on to fiction, we have way more fiction because people are more interested in reading fiction. So the first piece of fiction that I recommend to everybody is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. You will probably be told at least once in your life to read this timeless magical realism novel by Nobel Prize of Literature winner Gabriel Garcia Marquez. So if no one told you yet, I'm telling you. I like to write short stories, and no one has influenced my writing style as much as this author has. In this book, he tells the story of the Buendia family through multiple generations who live in a fictional town founded by the original Buendia couple. As we moved from generation to generation, the characters repeat the same mistakes as their ancestors. This book has everything. themes of magic, family, war, politics, and love. It's so well written, and I'm also a big fan of Marquez. Reading this was just a pleasure. It's a bit mad at times. Can be confusion because it moves from generation to generation, and to make it even more difficult, a lot of the characters, almost all of the characters have the exact same names as their ancestors. So in my book, luckily, there's a little drawing of a family tree at the start, but if you don't have that, I recommend maybe searching it up as you're reading the book. But honestly, it's a brilliant book. It's written so well, and there's other books by Marquez that I recommend, but this is obviously like one that I think will appeal to most people. Although I don't know, I've heard a lot of people not like his writing or not like this book, but like most of the reviews are immense. And also this author, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, he's Colombian, and his work is so influential that people in Colombia like basically worship him. I heard that there's street names dedicated to his books or his characters. I don't know if that's true, but yeah. Another one of my all-time favorites is a short and entertaining read. The Picture of Dorian Gray by Irish writer Oscar Wilde. It's a very well-known classic about a wealthy Englishman who is obsessed with his looks and staying young, beautiful, and desirable. And he finds himself in a curse through a portrait made by his friend who also is kind of in love with him. At first, this curse is a blessing to him. He gets to stay young, desirable, attractive, but as time goes on, he becomes immoral and commits crimes, so he tries to break the curse. I love this book because it was interesting and it had aspects of, I think, in my opinion, psychological horror, and the dialogue between the characters was very well written. So the book is also famous for exploring aestheticism, which is a theory that you might correlate with art for the sake of art, and the moral consequence of the self-absorption that comes from this mindset. So this is a cool and short read. It's only 100 and... depends on the book you have, but my one's only like about 160, 170 pages. It did take me a while to get through it because the language is a bit difficult. So at first I was, had to keep looking at a dictionary because it's like very old English. But as time went on and I actually really got into the storyline, such a good book. The next novel which I recommend is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I remember initially reading this book, and for like the first 40 pages, I couldn't see what the hype is about this book. I found it on TikTok. Like, it was well written, but not much was happening. And then I think there was either a pivotal plot turn or the characters became really fucking interesting. But I honestly can't remember what it was. But I became obsessed with this book. Obsessed. I don't know if everyone will enjoy it as much as I did, but if you like or are interested in reading a tale about a poor guy who's an unreliable narrator giving up everything to fit in with an elite group of friends who are so far removed from reality, they turn against each other and it becomes a criminal, and all of this is set in an academic background, then I recommend this book a lot. And they discuss a lot of ancient Greek philosophy. You should check it out. It's a perfect autumn read too. I read this probably between last October and November, and it was beautiful. Another read that I think I should mention is Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. I know that it's a controversial and a possibly difficult read, but if it is interpreted correctly, I think it's a very important read. You can Google what the book is about, but my point is that it's written solely in the predator's, Humber Humbert's point of view, so nothing he writes is credible. It's the opposite. It's not a romance. It's a horror for the girl Dolores, and the movie helped me to see it more. But Nabokov adds in a lot of clues that suggest that Dolores, or Lolita, is actually trying to escape and shows resistance, and she is aware of what is happening to her. We just never hear it from her point of view. It's glorified by Humber Humbert. So that's just a book that I think is worth a mention. And last but not least is Normal People by Sally Rooney, an Irish novelist. I'm not really a romance reader, but this book was just so sad, so well written, and had such interesting characters. It's more of a fun, entertaining read, but I still recommend it if you need something fun to read. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed my first video, and if you would like me to continue videos, comment below suggestions or and make sure to subscribe.